From Thom Hartmann's Daily Take Substack. Are Americans being conditioned by our media to become, quote, good Germans, end quote? When governments rewrite reality and the press goes along, cruelty becomes invisible and the public becomes complicit. Published August 15th, 2025. The following is a song inspired by this article.
We laughed in the cafes. The streets were so still. The headlines were quiet. The air had a chill. They said they were moving, just cleaning the town. We turned the page over, the truth never found. We didn't know, we didn't see what they were doing to them could happen to me. We closed our eyes, we shut the door. Silence is the chain that they're waiting for. We didn't know, but we could have known more. The trains rolled at midnight, no names, just the sound. They painted the fences, they planted the ground. They sold us a picture where no one could bleed, and hid all the faces we chose not to see. We didn't know, we didn't see what they were doing to them could happen to me. We closed our eyes, we shut the door. Silence is the chain that they're waiting for. We didn't know, but we could have known more. If we speak too late, the voices are gone. If we wait for proof, the proof moves on. Every quiet heart is a brick in the wall, and the wall keeps rising till it buries us all. We didn't know, we didn't see. Now the mirror's staring right back at me. We closed our eyes, we turned away, but the price of silence is always paid. We didn't know, and now it's too late.
We're all familiar with Trump's famous deportation flights of Venezuelans and Kilmar Abrego Garcia to a concentration camp in El Salvador in violation of a court's order. But did you know that there have been over 1,000 such flights in the past few months, some to absolute hellhole countries? On top of that, the Washington Post reports this morning that ICE is planning to open or expand 125 new, quote, detention facilities, end quote, across the country, including ones to hold families, giving America the largest prison system in the world. The paper notes, quote, the documents outline the strategy behind ICE's breakneck expansion, a chaotic effort that has already triggered lawsuits and accusations of cruelty, end quote. Are Americans being conditioned by our media to become, quote, good Germans, end quote? For several decades, I did international relief work for a nonprofit based in Germany. My family and I even lived at the organization's headquarters at Stadsteinach for much of 1987 and 86 and 7. One of my closest co-workers and mentors was a man 25 years my senior, Horst von Heyer, who had been a teenage member of the Hitler Youth when World War II ended. I started working with Horst in the late 1970s after his assistant was eaten by a crocodile in southern Africa. For example, he went into Uganda together to deal with the post-Idi Amin 1980 famine and set up a program for orphan kids that continues to this day. When we lived in Germany, Horst and I used to have lunch together nearly every day when we were both in town, and he became one of my closest friends. He's now passed away. So, of course, I asked him how Germans and him as a teenager could possibly have been okay with the Nazis rounding up millions of Jews and other, quote, undesirables, end quote, to ship via boxcars to the death camps. His answer was frankly shocking in its simplicity. Quote, we didn't know, end quote. The concentration camps within Germany were, he explained, for, quote, the worst of the worst, end quote, criminals and, quote, traitors, end quote, who tried to overthrow the country. The Republican Great Depression and the chaos that followed World War I, he told me, had created a massive problem of street crime and homeless people. So most middle-class Germans, feeling unsafe, enthusiastically supported Hitler's, quote, law and order, end quote, agenda. Those, quote, innocent, end quote, Jews, gypsies, and others removed from local areas were being moved, Horst said he was told, because their residences were slated to be part of what we'd call, quote, urban renewal, end quote, efforts. They were simply being resettled, and it would end up better for them and the communities they were leaving. Quote, I remember how shocked we all were when the pictures came out from the Polish death camps like Auschwitz at the end of the war, end quote, he told me. Quote, you Americans and the rest of the world were shocked too. Hitler's men and the German media had done a really good job in keeping it all under wraps, end quote. In that, I discovered by reading Schreier's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and others' research, Horst was right. By the end of 1933, Hitler had largely neutered Germany's free press, not by market competition, but by bankrupting writers and outlaws with libel lawsuits, unleashing police raids for, quote, slander, end quote, claims, vigilante brown shirt, end quote, militia violence against reporters, arrests for publishers for, quote, publishing anti-German propaganda, end quote, the outright seizure of progressive newspapers, and a sweeping Schriftleitungsgesetz, quote, editor's law, end quote, which criminalized journalism that exposed government excess. Nazi loyalists and party-friendly oligarchs took over the press outlets that remained in a massive media consolidation project, ensuring that every headline and every radio news report served the regime, much like Fox, quote, news, end quote, and right-wing hate radio, quote, / podcasts do today for Trump. When stories were published about Jews and others being transported, they were couched in euphemisms like Umsiedlung, resettlement, or Evakuierung, evacuation, or Ebenscheinschutz, labor deployment, in official communications, press coverage, and public speeches. These terms fit neatly into propaganda narratives about, quote, urban renewal, end quote, war effort, labor needs, or, quote, population transfers, end quote, from, quote, overcrowded, end quote, and, quote, crime-ridden, end quote, cities. There were literally no public reports in Germany about mass killings or illegal detentions between 1934 and the end of the war in 1945. Today, in the U.S., the lack of coverage of Trump's brutal treatment of immigrants, lack of due process, and hundreds of monthly deportation flights to hellhole countries or foreign concentration camps isn't due to a Schleicher-Junitz legal ban, but rather to billionaire owners sucking up to Trump, partisan political framing, and the media's tendency to underplay ongoing systemic human rights abuses once they've been normalized. We saw something like this in the early days of the Iraq War, when the Bush administration tried to normalize and justify the black sites, torture, and murders that were later exposed to the horror of Americans and the world. In both 1940s Germany and today's America, the effect is similar. The public is shielded from the human scale of state-led actions against targeted groups, making it easier for those policies to continue without mass pushback. In the first day of Trump's second term, 7,300 people were put on military flights and deported from the U.S. The numbers have only grown since then, with virtually no oversight and little by way of due process. Since he took power, over 100 immigration judges, about 15%, have been fired nationwide. As Chicago's former Assistant Chief Immigration Judge Jennifer Payton noted, she added, quote, "Since January 2025, the immigration courts under EOIR are no longer honoring or offering due process like they did when I was appointed. The court system has been systematically and intentionally destroyed, defunded, and politicized by this administration. I don't know why this has happened, but I fear for our country and for justice," end quote. Meanwhile, American media has engaged in 1940s German-like scheme to downplay the horrors of these disappearances. When I heard a guest on CNN Wednesday night mention in passing that there had been over 1,000 deportation flights in recent months, I was shocked. Why didn't I know? Every day I read at least a dozen different news outlets, and I am a voracious consumer of cable news. Yet, like most Americans, I thought deportation flights to foreign horror chambers were the exception, like with Alberto Garcia rather than the rule. After all, the Biden administration was also running deportation flights. The difference is that they only happened after due process had been granted to the deportees, and they were never sent to foreign concentration camps or dumped into hellholes like South Sudan. In 1944, as questions were being raised by stories leaking into the foreign press about the boxcars of people traversing the countryside, the Hitler administration produced a slick PR effort around a concentration camp in Sachsenstadt, Czechoslovakia. It served as a way stop on the routes to the death camps, but Goebbels had the barracks painted, gardens planted, and the grounds beautified. He then organized, quote, social and cultural events for the visiting dignitaries, end quote, and the press, and made a documentary film of their one-day visit with the simple title Theresienstadt that played in theaters across Germany. The international press bought it, hook, line, and sinker, reporting to the world that the Nazi detention camps weren't all that bad and were just part of rebuilding and cleaning up Germany after World War I and the Great Depression. Which raises the question, how long will it be before we start seeing films and made-for-TV events with Noam or Bondi telling us how, quote, humane, end quote, the new private for-profit, quote, detention centers, end quote, that are being built by Trump's donors and cronies? I give them about a month to get their propaganda routine together. In the meantime, they'll seem to be doing everything they can to make sure we really don't know the full scope and brutality of their efforts to push brown and black people out of the United States.